Are you struggling to find affordable housing? You're not alone. The housing crisis in the US has just reached a new level of urgency, and things are only getting worse. In this video, we'll dive into the latest data and trends to understand the scope of the problem and what it means for renters and homeowners alike. Get ready to learn why the housing crisis just got bigger than ever before. The United States is bracing for a devastating wave of evictions, which is not only a reflection of the dire housing crisis, but also a proof that the system is rigged against the citizens, preventing them from building equity through home ownership and forcing them into increasingly expensive and precarious rentals. Distortions in the rental market are becoming so extreme that even middle-class suburbs are seeing a rise in evictions faster than lower and upper-income neighborhoods. As a result, poverty levels are increasing, and the middle class is being hollowed out. Nearly everyone in the country is burdened by rent costs, and experts warn that housing insecurity could become the norm for the majority of the population as wealthy investors control 40% of single-family rental homes and drive rent prices to astronomical heights. We kindly ask for your support by giving us a thumbs up before we delve into the disturbing crisis that's looming ahead of us. Housing advocates are sounding the alarm bells about the upcoming wave of evictions in 2023 that will impact millions of adults and children in the US. This crisis reflects the rigged system we live in, which prevents us from building equity through home ownership and forces us into renting properties that are increasingly expensive and precarious. The rental market's distortions have become so extreme that even middle-class suburbs are experiencing higher eviction rates than lower and upper-income neighborhoods. As a result, the middle class is being hollowed out, and poverty levels are on the rise. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans are cost-burdened by rent, and experts predict that housing insecurity could become the norm in the future as affluent investors control 40% of single-family rental homes, driving up rent prices to astronomical heights. Recent research by Princeton University's Eviction Lab shows that middle-class households are facing the highest risk of eviction this time around. For years, being able to afford decent quality, stable housing in a safe neighborhood was a critical component of financial and personal security for middle-income Americans. But with each passing month, more and more of them are getting priced out of middle-class neighborhoods. The number of middle-class families evicted from their homes in suburbs across the country has been on the rise, with the rate of evictions in middle-class suburbs at an all-time high. Researchers compiled eviction records from 74 U.S. metropolitan areas and found that the share of evictions in suburban areas increased in 58 of these areas, with the Cleveland-Elyria, Ohio metropolitan area experiencing the largest increase in suburban evictions, with evictions of middle-income households rising by 55%. These findings serve as a reminder that housing insecurity and homelessness are not just issues faced by low-income Americans. Scott, an expert on suburban poverty and professor of public policy at the University of Washington in Seattle, emphasizes this point. According to U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge, even minimum wage workers can't afford to pay rent in the U.S. anymore. The lack of affordable housing is one of the main issues facing middle-class Americans in the suburbs who are now facing the threat of eviction. The problem is exacerbated by rising inflation and stagnant wages, as high-paying manufacturing jobs have dried up and been replaced by lower-paying service and retail jobs. As rent prices continue to rise, experts warn that a major eviction crisis could occur, leaving many struggling to find a place to live. Adding to the problem, Wall Street investors are expected to control up to 40% of single-family rental homes by 2027, making it more difficult for prospective home buyers to build wealth through homeownership. This has led to a rental market that is increasingly precarious and unaffordable for millions of middle-class Americans. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Marcia Fudge, even minimum wage workers can no longer afford to pay rent in the country. This is a sign that something is deeply wrong with our system, especially when middle-income earners are also struggling to pay rent. While lack of affordable housing is one of the main issues facing middle-class Americans in the suburbs, a report suggests that the problem is much more complex. As high-paying manufacturing jobs have dried up in suburbs, they have been replaced by jobs in the service and retail sectors that pay significantly less. This has left many workers in a more precarious financial position, especially as inflation rises and wages remain stagnant. The problem is further exacerbated by the fact that Wall Street investors are taking an interest in the rental market, with estimates indicating that they may control as much as 40% of single-family rental homes by 2027. This is bad news for the rental market as a whole, because corporate landlords tend to be ruthless and less flexible than mom-and-pop landlords, filing almost 4 times more evictions than small property owners, even during the pandemic. In recent months, there has been an increase in eviction filings, which can be a traumatic experience for families. The rise in rents is also contributing to the affordability crisis. The US median rent increased another 2.4% in February, reaching almost $2,000. This is rooted in an inventory shortage, and many people are also uncertain about the economy, leading to a decrease in moving around. As a result, for the first time ever, 44 million American renters are spending 30% of their income on rent or more, with middle-income households renting a 2-bedroom apartment in most metropolitan areas having to direct 41% of their income towards rent every month. Low-income workers are even worse off, with 17 million of them losing up to 55% of their pay to cover rent. All of these factors combine to create a dire situation for many Americans who are struggling to find affordable and stable housing. Without significant changes to the system, the eviction crisis will only worsen, and the dream of homeownership will remain out of reach for millions of middle-class Americans. According to Moody's, a staggering number of renters in several U.S. states are facing the threat of eviction and homelessness due to being severely burdened by housing costs. In Georgia, a shocking 65% of renters are at risk of eviction, followed by Louisiana with 35%, and South Carolina with 33.9%. Even in states with lower percentages, such as Maryland and Arizona, over 20% of tenants are in danger of being evicted in the coming months. This problem is further compounded by the fact that a significant portion of American households are behind on at least one repayment, with wages failing to keep up with the rapidly rising housing costs. As a result, Americans are experiencing financial distress and struggling to make ends meet. Unfortunately, this problem is only expected to worsen, as a recent survey found that most renters experienced rent increases without a corresponding increase in wages, leading to a higher likelihood of missed payments and more families being pushed into homelessness. Kevin Palmer, the head of Freddie Mac Multifamily, stated that the increase in rents over the past year has led to greater uncertainty for renters in the United States. Palmer noted that the national housing affordability crisis is worsening, and inflation is a significant driver of the issue. He predicts that housing insecurity will soon become a reality for most people in the country. Renters are currently using all the resources available to them to cope with the situation. In fact, a record number of Americans tapped into their 401(k) plans for hardship withdrawals, which provide a financial lifeline to those in need of emergency funds, such as for medical care or eviction prevention. This rise in hardship withdrawals comes amid the highest spike in the cost of living in 4 decades, along with rising interest rates, which have made it more expensive to borrow money and afford goods and services. Unfortunately, the outlook is grim. Real estate attorney David Miller, who specializes in debt defense, predicts that eviction and foreclosure rates will double by the end of the year. He emphasized that there is no way to sugarcoat the situation. From a landlord's perspective, if they have the ability to raise rent, they will do it, and this will not be good for American citizens. Evictions disrupt multiple aspects of people's lives, such as their health, relationships, job, and their children's education. With the ongoing recession, these struggles will be exacerbated for many Americans who may lose their jobs and source of income. The current housing crisis has created a dire situation for many renters who are not only struggling to make rent payments, but are also at risk of losing their homes. However, the problem goes beyond just the immediate impact of eviction. Evictions can also have long-term effects on renters, making it harder for them to find a new home due to a negative rental history. This is especially true for corporate landlords who have the resources to screen tenants and may turn away those who have been evicted in the past. Peter Hepburn, a sociologist at Rutgers University and a research fellow at Princeton University's Eviction Lab, warns that this situation can lead to a housing spiral, where one eviction leads to another, trapping families in a cycle of instability and insecurity in their housing. Unfortunately, the government officials who fueled the growth of the housing bubble and caused this crisis have no easy fix to offer. It seems that their plan all along was to snatch the supply of homes that would otherwise be available to US families, creating absurd price increases and dismantling the middle class. As a result, the dream of homeownership is now out of reach for many Americans, and housing insecurity has become the new normal. The situation is dire, and it's clear that we will all have to deal with it the hard way. The government must take action to address the root causes of this crisis and provide relief to those who are suffering. Otherwise, the housing crisis will only continue to worsen, leaving more and more families without a stable and secure place to call. As we've seen, the housing crisis in the US has reached unprecedented levels, with millions of renters facing eviction and housing insecurity. The problem is not limited to just a few states, but it's a nationwide issue that's only expected to get worse in the coming months. The statistics presented in this video are alarming, and they paint a bleak picture of the current state of the American housing market. It's clear that this crisis requires urgent attention and action from government officials, policymakers, and communities alike. We hope that by raising awareness about this issue, we can all work towards finding viable solutions and ensuring that everyone has access to safe and affordable housing.